Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday webinar talking about Office 365 security, the new improvements announced at Microsoft Ignite. Just a little bit about us before we get started. We are a global consulting firm that serves more than 40% of Fortune 1000 and Fortune Global 500 companies. Protiviti is a full-service ECM team and have helped hundreds of clients realize the value of SharePoint and Office 365. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is actually in its 5th year. We are a 30-minute webinar series that presented every other Thursday where we talk all things SharePoint, Office 365, and ECM. Our next webinar will be on November 17th where Doug Heminger, SharePoint MVP, will be giving an introduction to administering your Office 365 tenant. You can register for that webinar and see our full event schedule on our website, ecm.protiviti.com. We are offering a free 1-hour introductory consultation for our on-demand SharePoint and Office 365 support. Our Office 365 and SharePoint support team provides performance troubleshooting, system health checks, workflows, user experience, and so much more. If you're interested in scheduling your one free hour, you can schedule today by emailing us at ecm@protiviti.com, and you can learn more about this on our website. Today's session is being recorded, and you can access the recording of today's session and see a past webinar recordings on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ProtivitiSP. For questions during today's presentation, please use the question window or live tweet us your questions at ProtivitiECM using hashtag 30T0365. Today's presenter is Antonio Maio, 5-time SharePoint MVP here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. So Antonio, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Julia. So hi everyone, it's great to be here again talking to you about Office 365 security. Today we're going to do a quick review of some of the new innovations in the security space in Office 365 that were announced at Microsoft Ignite. I had the privilege of attending the Microsoft Ignite 2016 conference in Atlanta this past September. It was, of course, full of a lot of great sessions and demos and announcements. And I was actually really impressed that a lot of those sessions focused on the security capabilities of the Office 365 platform. And I came away with the conference with the feeling that through these sessions, through the various improvements that we saw and the announcements that were made, that Microsoft is clearly demonstrating their commitment and their continued investment in providing a secure environment with the Office 365 platform. And with this, they're providing, as we'll see, a robust set of features that enable both them as the operator of the service and us as customers and users of the service to protect our sensitive data in Office 365. Now, that said, the security of our data, even in the Microsoft cloud, is always a shared responsibility. So Microsoft has the responsibility of providing the most secure cloud platform available, and I do believe they honestly provide the most secure cloud platform out there. But they also give us a robust set of capabilities that allow us to control how our information is secured, how it's accessed, how it's shared, governed, and monitored. And it's really up to us to make efficient use of those controls in ways that protect our business, but still allow our business and our users to be productive. And today we're going to look at some of the new innovations that were introduced and announced. We've had a lot of robust security capabilities for some time, but we saw some really new improvements, some really, I think, meaningful improvements at the conference. So I'm going to talk to you about a few of those today. Now, I wanted to start talking about the core principles that Microsoft often talks about, or the areas that they focus on when it comes to security within Office 365. Just minimize that out of my way. Pardon me a second. Now, first we have platform security. Now, this principle really refers to the processes and infrastructures within the data center itself that keep our data safe while it's at rest, while it resides within the Microsoft data center, and while our data is in transit. So as it's communicated from client browser to the Office 365 service, or as it's communicated between data centers as well. The second core principle, or the area that they focus on, is secure access and sharing. Of course, SharePoint being a collaboration platform, we need to be able to share our content with others, and we want to do this in a secure way. Now, this focus for Microsoft means giving customers the controls they need to ensure that sharing and access either inside the organization or outside the organization meets the organization's compliance and security needs. The third area of focus is awareness and insights, and this really means giving customers complete visibility into how SharePoint and OneDrive are used in the organization so that the organization can be more informed and they can make better decisions and they can get really more value out of their Office 365 subscription. The next core principle that they often talk about, which I think is critical to any SharePoint or Office 365 environment, is information governance. And this means, to Microsoft, giving customers controls so that they can control and govern the life cycle of the data in the organization. They can decide when to delete it, how long to keep it or retain it for. They can decide when and how to perform e-discovery, and they can even apply legal holds. And then finally, we have compliance and trust. Now, this core principle is really about meeting the most up-to-date regulatory compliance standards so that customers like us can always rely on Office 365 being a platform that meets the regulatory compliance requirements that are important to our business. This also means that Microsoft is fully transparent with customers about how Microsoft runs the Office 365 service and how they manage your data. Now, these principles, being the focus for Microsoft in the security space, demonstrate Microsoft's commitment to investing in the security of the overall platform. Some of these investments, as I mentioned, were announced and demonstrated at Ignite. So let's take a look at some of those right away. I've got quite a few to share, so we're going to jump right in. Now, the first innovation I want to talk about is site classification. Now, this innovation was originally announced at the May the 4th Future of SharePoint event. And we saw numerous demos of this at Microsoft Ignite. A lot of the demos included site classification as one of the security features that's going to be rolling out later this year. Now, it doesn't yet appear in any public tenants or first release tenants, but it is supposed to be rolling out soon. So hopefully we'll see it appear very soon. Now, through my experience, I've seen a lot of organizations actually develop this feature themselves through some sort of custom site creation workflow. In fact, what we see is classification tends to be the most popular reason for building a custom site creation workflow in order to ask the users or the site creator this exact question. What's the sensitivity of data that's going to be stored in my site? Now, we do find just about all organizations have sensitive data. But a really common security challenge for them is identifying what data is sensitive and where sensitive data is stored. Sensitive data can't always be identified by DLP policies or by some sort of automated scan looking for keywords, patterns, or regular expressions. Sometimes you can use those types of technologies, and we're going to talk about DLP in just a few minutes. But sometimes it actually requires a person to identify that a particular document or piece of data is sensitive. Now, it's really nice to see this feature that many have implemented themselves actually becoming a standard feature that all users hopefully can take advantage of. Now, site classification seems like a really small feature, but it really has some major benefits for clients in allowing them to identify where sensitive data may live and where sensitive data cannot live, where it's not permitted to reside. It allows people to define this when they create a site. And it also helps to educate users that are visiting a site. It allows users to know when they visit a new site or when they're invited to a new site to know that this site contains confidential data or this site contains data that's designated for internal use only. And that then helps users understand how they're supposed to handle that data, who they're allowed to share it with and who they're not allowed to share it with. Essentially, the way the feature works is upon creating a site, the site creator will be asked to select an additional option from a drop-down that we can see there near the bottom, the site classification. Now, we're told that these classification labels, what you see here as general purpose, internal use, confidential, that they'll in fact be customizable, that they'll be configurable. Now, we haven't yet seen what that configuration looks like. However, below the site classification drop-down list, we have a usage guidelines link, which is actually an extremely useful part of this feature because it'll allow us to specify a link to a page that actually defines what each classification label means. This is both useful for the site creator, so they can select the right classification for their site, but it's also useful for people visiting a site, so they can understand what does an internal use only site mean? What am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? For example, if I see a site classified as general purpose, does that mean I'm allowed to share it with people outside of the organization? Does that mean I'm allowed to allow people to access it from their Hotmail account, for example? So having these definitions clearly written, having them available for all users in the organization is extremely important so that once you start making use of site classification, you can experience all the benefits that it provides, both having site owners, site creators consider the question, what type of data, what's the sensitivity of the data that's going to be stored in my site, and who can I share that content with, and allow end users to understand what data is sensitive to the organization, where does that sensitive data live, and what am I allowed to do with it? What are the handling policies around that data? Finally, once a classification is selected and a site is created, you'll actually see that classification appear below the site banner. You'll actually see that this particular site is classified as confidential. So that means data within the site cannot be shared outside of the organization, for example, or a confidential site just has to comply with the classification schema or the data classification program for my organization. Now finally, we're also told that we will have programmatic access to a site's classification, which will then allow us through some sort of custom code that we would build or some sort of custom workflow to enforce other custom policies on sensitive data within the site. Now we haven't yet seen what this programmatic access will look like, but we're very excited to find out what that is and to make use of it going forward. The second innovation that was announced at Ignite and demonstrated that I particularly find very interesting is conditional access policies. Now to me this really is one of the most interesting security features that's coming out in Office 365. Now we have kind of a taste of that feature here in SharePoint Online. Conditional access policies actually goes much broader than this if you make use of Microsoft Intune. But what we're going to talk about here doesn't require Intune specifically. Now there's a number of conditions that can be evaluated as part of conditional access policies. This feature is currently in preview with only specific Office 365 customers, and it's not yet available to the public or first release customers, but we're looking forward to that hopefully coming out soon. Conditional access policies actually means evaluating in real time the conditions under which a user is trying to access content on a SharePoint site. And as I said, there's numerous conditions that you can configure under these policies. The first one here that we're highlighting is whether a device is domain joined or non-domain joined or unmanaged. So the conditions here we can configure either allowing full access to content or to team sites from domain joined and non-domain joined devices. So for example, if I have a home PC and I'm using that to access my work Office 365 tenant, this particular option will allow me to access Office 365 team sites that are shared with me. Or through the third option there, I can block all access or prevent all access from non-domain joined devices, which will then mean that I can only access Office 365 team sites from a corporate device or from a domain joined device. However, if I want to get a little bit more specific than that, I don't want to allow all access or prevent all access. I want to allow some level of collaboration from a non-domain joined device, perhaps from a employee's home, perhaps while they're traveling, for example. I can be a little bit more specific than that with that middle option there, the one that says disable options to download, print, and sync from web browsers. Now with this option, I can allow a level of collaboration from non-domain joined devices and ensure that corporate data is not leaked to a personal device, or it doesn't remain on a personal device, which is a common security challenge for a lot of organizations. We can disable operations that allow a user to change or make a copy of that data, like download, print, and sync. In this case, with this option, a user can only use their device to read or view content, and they end up with no way to actually edit, delete, or save a copy of that data. Enabling this policy also limits a user to using only a web browser to access content. So even if, for example, they try to use the print function within the web browser, they'll be prevented from doing that. Now, an additional option that we see here is the ability to control what location a user can access team sites from. Now, in this case, location actually means the network that they're connecting to. I simply need to enable this policy and then specify the IP address ranges that I want to allow access from. If a user is connected to SharePoint Online from one of these IP address ranges, then they'll be permitted to access team sites that are shared with them. If they're connecting from a public IP address, let's say a Wi-Fi at Starbucks or a Wi-Fi at the airport, they'll be denied access. They'll actually receive an access denied message when they try to access those sites. You do need to be careful when configuring this feature, though, because if you don't have your IP address ranges exactly right, you can actually easily, inadvertently lock yourself out of all SharePoint site collections. Now, when you do configure conditional access policies, they do apply to all of your site collections. There's no ability today to configure these policies on a site-specific basis, at least not yet. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this particular feature, there's additional conditional access policies that can be applied that are related to the compliance status of a device that's being used to access resources in SharePoint Online. These additional policies do require Microsoft Intune to be deployed to your organization. And actually, after this webinar, or a little later today, I'm posting a very detailed blog post on all of this information, and that'll include a link to a Microsoft article on how to use those additional policies with Intune. The third security feature I wanted to talk about, or innovation that announced at Microsoft Ignite or demoed at Microsoft Ignite, were some additional controls around external sharing. Now, for some time, we've had some great controls around external sharing with Office 365 and SharePoint Online. They've been in our tenant for quite a while. These controls primarily control the default sharing settings for all site collections. And you have various levels where you can control external sharing in Office 365. But at Ignite, there were a few additions to this that have been announced and demonstrated that I think are really useful and meaningful. So if we look at the external sharing options that we've had available for a while, you can do things like either prevent external sharing altogether. You can permit external sharing for users that already exist in the Azure Active Directory. These are users that are known to us, that we've created accounts for in our Office 365 tenant, but we've not necessarily given them licenses. We can determine whether we want to permit external sharing and force those users to authenticate. These are either with Microsoft accounts, so accounts like hotmail.com, live.com, outlook.com, or from accounts that are federated with Office 365, so other Office 365 tenants, for example, or whether we want to allow both authenticated users, as we've described, and anonymous guest links. So these are all options that we've had for some time. We've also been able to determine if we do enable anonymous guest links, how long do we want those to be accessed for? And we can see that here where we've got anonymous guest links enabled for 30 days, for example. However, right below that, we see some new, I feel, meaningful options that are available. In particular, we can now choose, or we will be able to choose, because this feature is not deployed yet to public or first release tenants, we'll be able to choose that if we're sharing files through anonymous guest links, what are users permitted to do with those files? Are they allowed to view and edit those files, or are they allowed to only view those files? As well with folders, are users going to be able to only view folders and the contents of folders, or will they be able to view and edit and upload contents to those folders? Now, we've had external sharing for certain, I'll say, containers within Office 365. We all know that sites can be shared externally to authenticated users. Documents can be shared externally either to authenticated users or optionally through anonymous guest links. But it's not necessarily well known that folders are also shareable through external sharing. And that has actually been the case for quite a while, but it's now being exposed a little more here with this option. We can now see that that's available. And there's numerous other settings that are shown here that have been available for some time. We can determine the type of link that is shared, whether it's direct, whether it's only to internal users, or whether it's anonymous guest links, meaning anyone who has the link can access a shared document, or whether we want to allow only certain domains or deny certain domains access through external sharing as well. That's a feature that we've had for quite a while here. And finally, we've got whether external users have to accept the sharing invitation from the same account that the invitation was sent to. They can't forward that to another account and start accessing content from a different account. And then some, I think, meaningful notifications for OneDrive for Business. So, for example, if you're sharing content from your OneDrive for Business account, are other users allowed to be invited externally by those external users? So we can have the owner of a OneDrive for Business site actually receive an automated email when users to which the content is shared invite additional users themselves. Or we can have the OneDrive for Business site owner receive an automated email whenever an external user accepts a sharing invitation. We saw some enhancements to the DLP policies within the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center as well. In particular, we saw a new streamlined user experience for creating DLP policies, and then we also saw some additional new more granular controls over when sensitive content is found in Office 365, what are users restricted from doing with that content. We'll take a quick look at that here. So as always, to create a DLP policy, you would go to the Security and Compliance Center Office 365. Now this is the new user experience that was demoed at Microsoft Ignite. Of course, you click Create to create a new DLP policy. You then select the type of policy you want. It could be either financial, medical, or a privacy policy. And these policy types actually relate to the collection of sensitive data types that fit into that policy type. So Office 365 supports 80 sensitive data types, things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, various identity numbers from around the world. And these policy types or policy templates relate to certain subsets of those sensitive data types. If I select financial, for example, I'm told that this policy template is going to look for credit card numbers, bank account numbers, and ABA routing numbers. We then specify a name and a description for our policy. We then get to choose where our policy will be applied. It can either apply to all supported workloads in Office 365, or I can choose specific workloads. And now one great new advancement is that not only can my DLP policies here in the Security Compliance Center apply to SharePoint sites and OneDrive for Business sites, it can also apply to Exchange mailboxes. Now, we've had DLP policies for Exchange mailboxes for some time. DLP for Exchange has been built into Office 365 for quite a long time, actually. The nice advancement here, though, is I can have one set of policies accessed from one place, from the Security Compliance Center, that apply to all of these workloads. And I can manage one set of policies across all my supported workloads. We can also see here that for SharePoint sites, I can choose to either include or exclude certain SharePoint team sites as well. I then select, I confirm which sensitive data types this is going to apply to. As we talked about, this policy template applies to credit card numbers, US bank account numbers, or ABA routing numbers. I can add additional sensitive data types out of those 80 types. Later this year, I'm told that we're also going to be able to customize custom sensitive data types here as well. And then I can choose, we see here in the center of the screen, I can choose where this policy is applied. And we've had this before, but I just want to highlight. Here we can choose to apply this policy when content is shared inside the organization and outside the organization, or only when it's shared outside the organization, as shown here. Now I get to select a number of more granular specific options around this particular DLP policy. As previously, I can choose to display a policy tip to the user, letting them know that I'm violating corporate policy. I can also customize that policy tip so that I can have a custom message displayed to the user if I wish. A new option that's available here is detecting when there's a large quantity of sensitive information that's being shared at one time, and actually specify what large means. So for example, is sharing 10 documents with sensitive data considered a large amount of data, or is 50, or is 100? I can specify that here. And we have numerous other options as well. I can either issue an incident alert, I can customize what that alert looks like and who that alert goes to, and I can block people from sharing content, or I can restrict access to that content when sensitive data is found. Optionally, I can get rather detailed and allow a user to override policy tips that are shown. I can force them to provide a business justification, which gets logged when policy tips are overridden, or I can choose to allow the user to automatically override a particular rule when a false positive is reported. One nice aspect of DLP policies in Office 365 is that users are given the ability to report a false positive, which is a traditional challenge with DLP policies. Often with DLP, you'll find that certain sensitive data types get misrepresented. So for example, European telephone numbers often look like US Social Security numbers. So you might have a European telephone number in an email, and that gets reported as a policy violation. And you need to be able to adjust your DLP policies and receive that feedback from your end users when this type of false positive happens. And this feature allows you to do that. We then get to determine if I want to enable my policy now, or if I want to apply it in test mode first. We highly recommend you test DLP policies first. DLP policies are living, breathing policies within an organization. They're something that changes on some sort of regular basis. Rarely are they a thing that gets set once and forgotten and just stays the way they are forever. They do need to evolve and change, and we highly recommend that you test your DLP policies out before you roll them out to your production environment. Then you get to confirm the settings that you've chosen. You can edit them here as well. And finally, you get to create that DLP policy, and it starts to get applied immediately. I'm going to move on to the fifth innovation that was announced at Ignite, and this is a big one for me. This is still in preview with certain Office 365 customers. It's not available quite yet, but it's coming very soon, and that's hybrid auditing and logging. Now, in early 2016, Microsoft announced what's called activity monitoring, or sometimes referred to as audit logs in Office 365. And this is where various workloads in Office 365 will log activities performed by end users and administrators to a central audit log. And that audit log is searchable. You can search through it either through a GUI within the Security and Compliance Center, or you can search it through PowerShell, or through the Activity Management API. Now, this is a great feature for monitoring activities and for issuing automated alerts when users perform certain actions. Perhaps you want to monitor when users share content externally. That feature's been there since early this year. This announcement, however, tells us that we can now connect our SharePoint 2016 on-prem environment to our Office 365 tenant and have audit logs from our on-premise SharePoint 2016 environment automatically uploaded to Office 365, and we can search audit logs for both the on-prem environment and the Office 365 environment all in one place. Now, this feature does require SharePoint 2016 with the upcoming Feature Pack 1 that we also found out is due for release this month in November of 2016. So we're looking forward to having that feature pack and to having hybrid auditing available. The real benefit of this feature is that administrators and information security teams, even if they have both an on-premise SharePoint 2016 environment and an Office 365 tenant, they'll be able to collect activity logs all in one place. They'll be able to search those logs and look for suspicious behavior or malicious behavior all in one place, to configure alerts, automated alerts to be issued, again, all from one interface, and be able to more quickly react and take action when needed when suspicious or malicious behavior is detected. And just to show you quickly how this feature works, the interface that you have today for audit logs and searches, this is what the interface looks like today, where you're searching audit logs in the Office 365 interface. Essentially, you're going to use the exact same interface, and the audit log entries that are returned by that search will contain both on-premise entries and Office 365 entries as well, all in one search log. And you'll be able to filter them and export them through the controls that are already provided here. And one thing that I like to highlight is right from this interface, I can very quickly add an automated alert based on certain activities that I find. So if I see, oh, I see this user is sharing information externally a lot, let me create an alert related to that right away and start receiving automated alerts when this particular user performs this action, and then monitor that for suspicious or malicious behavior. So it allows me as an information security professional to search those logs, to be aware of what's going on, and when I see suspicious behavior, immediately add some controls that allow me to review that information in more detail. And we're hitting our time limit here, but I want to talk about just one more really quick feature. This is not necessarily something that was announced at Ignite. This is something that was demonstrated at Ignite, but I believe was there a little bit before Ignite. I think this was introduced recently into Office 365 tenants. And that's the ability to manage user sessions a little bit more. So let's say that I'm in an environment where I'm monitoring activity logs, I'm watching what users are doing. I notice some suspicious behavior. Maybe I notice a user is deleting large amounts of files. And I start to wonder, is this actually malicious behavior? You know, if this is someone that I trust, maybe their account's been compromised by a malicious attacker. Well, if I navigate to the Office 365 Admin Center, I go to my user management console and I select that user, I can actually initiate a one-time event that logs that user out of all the current sessions for Office 365, and that's done from the control that's shown right here. This will force all current sessions for that user in Office 365 to immediately log out, and the user will need to re-authenticate in order to access Office 365 again. If I trust the user, I can go do this. If I perhaps suspect that the user's password has been stolen, their credentials have been compromised, I can actually reset their password here as well and report that to them, inform them of that password change out of band. And allow them to re-authenticate. So, you know, if we're in a situation where I have a malicious user or an external attacker downloading or deleting information immediately, I can take some sort of immediate action to try to remediate that and then investigate what's happened afterwards. So I find this to be a particularly useful feature that not a lot of people necessarily know about. And then just some final thoughts. At Microsoft Ignite, we saw some great innovations and demonstrations around the security capabilities that either are in Office 365 already or that are coming later this year. There's certainly lots to learn. We do need to prepare for these features, and I encourage people to, first of all, check out all of the on-demand Microsoft Ignite 2016 sessions, and I've included the link here for that. All of the sessions at Microsoft Ignite were recorded. You can download the slide decks. You can actually see the live demonstrations yourself. I highly encourage you to look at those, to review them, to learn about those features, and prepare to take advantage of them. There's a lot of new security innovations and features that are available that allow you to, take a larger part in that shared responsibility of controlling how people within your organization access their data, make use of their data, how they share it, and control those processes. As well, I encourage you to check out my blog, www.trustsharepoint.com. I'm going to be posting these slides and a detailed blog on these announcements a little bit later today. And I just want to thank everyone for their time.
Thanks, Antonio. We will be sending out these links and follow-up messages to all of today's attendees. We also will be posting the recording on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Antonio, for the great information and all the updates from Ignite. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. We will see you in 2 weeks where we will be talking about more Office 365 news and updates. Have a great day, everyone.